The golden light of sunset poured through the glass walls of Skyline Robotics, bathing the 48th floor in a warm yet sharply edged hue. Outside, Las Vegas had not yet fully lit up, but the silhouettes of giant neon signs had begun to flicker in the distance, as if to remind everyone that this city never knew the meaning of sleep. Inside the main office, Kathleen Smith moved down the long hallway with the precision of a perfect metronome. The low heels of her shoes tapped lightly against the marble floor, steady, firm, yet never noisy. Kathleen's bronze-brown skin caught the last amber light of the day, her natural curls loosely pinned back, with a few tendrils framing her face. A navy blazer paired with a cream blouse traced her curves, striking a balance between professional and subtly elusive softness. Kathleen has been the strategic coordinator for Skyline Robotics for the past 3 years. This position never made the headlines, yet held enough influence to keep the massive machine running smoothly by the minute. In a place where every detail was scrutinized, she had mastered the art of becoming indispensable, while remaining almost invisible, a quiet survival skill. At exactly 5:45 p.m., the door in the corner office swung open. Roger Anderson stepped out, and as always, without looking at a clock, Kathleen knew the time down to the minute. The 42-year-old man was the very image the financial press often labeled the Desert Wolf, a tech billionaire, cold, precise, and utterly ruthless in every deal. His charcoal gray suit was flawlessly tailored, his navy tie perfectly aligned, and the watch on his left wrist caught the light like a clean, cold slice. His dark blonde hair, streaked with silver at the temples, only sharpened the impact of his ice-blue eyes as they swept the space. Nothing escaped Roger's notice, from an employee's active screen to the placement of a chair in the boardroom. "Is the Barcelona report complete?" His voice was low and clipped, leaving no room for detours. Kathleen stepped forward, tablet in hand. "The final version has been sent to your inbox and the European partners. I've also confirmed Monday's meeting with Mr. Alvarez, 9 a.m. at the Arts Hotel." Roger gave a brief nod, his gaze fixed on the tablet screen as Kathleen pulled up the strategic objectives. "And the Seattle conference. The schedule's been adjusted so you can fly out right after Barcelona. I've also asked the tech team to prepare a backup presentation in case of any online connection issues." A brief silence. Roger glanced at her, his eyes registering her thoroughness without further explanation. Good. That moment, just a nod, a single word, was something Kathleen had learned to read for its unspoken layers. He wasn't the type to offer verbal praise, but the trust in his tone was enough to make her heartbeat skip, dangerous and entirely inadvisable. They continued down the glass hallway together, while Las Vegas outside began donning its robe of light. Kathleen caught her reflection in passing, a quiet woman with eyes holding a current of ambition, still waiting for the right time to break free. She had studied strategic management in college, once dreaming of starting a consulting firm to help small businesses rise. But for now, she was Roger's right hand, and somehow that bond was both a launch pad and an invisible chain. As they neared the executive boardroom, young employees were engaged in animated discussion. A young woman among them, Tiana, a data analyst, lit up at the sight of Kathleen. "You saved us on that Q2 data error yesterday. We owe you a coffee." Kathleen smiled, giving a slight nod. "Just keep doing your part well." But deep inside, a quiet pride stirred. Those 2 a.m. fixes reminded her she wasn't merely the one standing next to power. She was someone who created value herself. Roger paused at the boardroom threshold and turned to her. "As usual, you've kept everything under control." His voice softened slightly. "Don't let the board keep you too late." That small instruction brushed against the fragile line Kathleen always tried to maintain. "I'll try," she replied, offering a thin smile, hiding the sudden misstep in her heartbeat. As Roger entered the room and the glass door slid shut, Kathleen stood outside, drawing a slow breath. Moments like that, fleeting yet charged, always left her wondering, did he feel the same pull she did, or was it just a one-sided game in herd? The sky outside had shifted entirely to deep navy streaks of light from the strip, spilling through the glass like a newly drawn horizon. Kathleen returned to her desk, fingers skimming over her tablet as she sorted the last emails of the day. But her mind lingered on his words, "You've kept everything under control." She knew well. At Skyline, a single misstep could erase years of hard-earned credibility. Just as out there, one step off the line could cost her the balance between ambition and emotion. And yet, those blue eyes surfaced again in her mind, both a challenge and a faint invitation. And tell me, dear audience, can you feel it? How are two people each standing at opposite ends of power, pulled toward each other by an unnamed thread, yet pretend there's nothing there? If you're just as curious to see how far that thread can stretch before it snaps, maybe drop a like. So I know you're walking alongside Kathleen in this story. Who knows, your comment might open up a new angle, or a bold guess about where this tale is headed. Because every hand can turn instantly here in Las Vegas, and the game between Roger Anderson and Kathleen Smith has just begun. The late September sky over Barcelona was washed in honey gold, the afternoon sun slanting over the deep red rooftops. From the high balcony of the Arts Hotel, the Mediterranean stretched endlessly, each wave glinting as if coated in metallic light. Kathleen leaned against the railing, breathing in the salty tang of the sea breeze, letting the sound of waves blend with the distant clang of trams on the street below. This trip had been scheduled in a rush after Skyline Robotics made it onto the shortlist for collaboration with Sergio Alvarez, one of Europe's most prominent tech investors. From the moment they landed at El Prat, her and Roger's schedule had barely allowed them a moment to breathe strategic meetings, partner introductions, contract reviews. Yet in the rare gaps between Barcelona had already slipped into Kathleen's mind like a fleeting love affair, intense, alluring, and full of surprises. The glass door behind her slid open. Roger stepped out, white shirt sleeves rolled up tie, loosened the top buttons undone to reveal sun-browned skin. He set an espresso down on the table standing beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon where sea and sky met. "Is the report for tomorrow ready?" His voice was low, tinged with the rasp of someone who had spoken all day. "It's ready," Kathleen replied, eyes still on the silver-tipped waves. "The presentation's been adjusted to suit Alvarez's style. I've also had legal prepare supplemental clauses if he wants to renegotiate." Roger gave a slight nod, his blue eyes glinting with that familiar note of satisfaction. "I knew I could count on you." He paused, then unexpectedly asked, "Have you ever been here before?" Kathleen turned slightly surprised. "Just once, back in college. I spent 3 months here for an academic exchange. It was beautiful. Barcelona suits you." His tone wasn't hollow flattery. It felt like carefully weighed observation. His gaze lingered long enough to thicken the air between them. Dinner with Sergio Alvarez occurred at a seaside restaurant where warm yellow light reflected off red wine glasses and wooden tables. Sergio could command a room, salt and pepper hair, a cream linen suit, and a warm smile that made his company feel like the most important person there. He spoke passionately about bringing medical robotics to public hospitals in Spain, glancing at Kathleen now and then with undisguised curiosity. "Kathleen, Roger tells me you're the mind behind most of Skyline's strategic plans," Sergio said in his deep melodic Spanish-accented voice. "Brains like that don't often find their way into boardrooms, especially paired with such composure." Kathleen smiled politely. "I do my part, Mr. Alvarez. Success is the result of a whole team." Seated beside her, Roger shifted his gaze briefly towards Sergio, just enough for Kathleen to catch the slight tightening of his jawline. She couldn't tell if it was a protective reflex or something else. Dinner stretched on until the moon hung low over the sea. When Sergio shook hands goodbye, he leaned in to brush Kathleen's cheek in the European way, the scent of warm, woody cologne lingering. "Tomorrow will be a big day. I look forward to seeing your presentation," he said before leaving. The deep blue carpeted hallway at the hotel led them to their rooms on the upper floor. Kathleen stopped at her door, card key in hand. Roger stood beside her, silent momentarily, as though weighing a decision. "Would you like a glass of wine?" he asked to end a long day, his voice lower than usual. Kathleen hesitated. She knew the thin line between business and something else, a line they had carefully kept intact for 3 years. But in a city of lights and flamenco rhythms, boundaries seemed easier to blur. She nodded one glass. Roger's suite opened to a sweeping view of the Olympic Port white boats, anchored under lights like stars fallen to the water. He poured wine into 2 crystal glasses, handed her one, then sat on the sofa gesturing for her to sit opposite. They talked about Barcelona, the cobbled streets, the cafes of El Born, and the business trips that had taken them worldwide, yet rarely left them time to feel the places they visited. Roger said that you always know how to control everything, and his eyes were fixed on her. "I'm not sure I've ever said, but I value that." Kathleen set her glass down, her chest tightening at the simple words. "That's my job. Maybe. But not everyone could do it the way you do." His voice was quieter, slower. The golden light from the lamp softened the edges of his usually stern features. The space between them seemed to shrink with each breath. Kathleen became acutely aware of her heartbeat, each thud like a countdown to something inevitable. When his lips touched hers, reason dissolved like sugar in hot coffee. It wasn't rushed or loud, a certainty steeped over years, a confession without words. That night, Barcelona outside stayed awake, but the world narrowed to just the two in the high room above the city. The walls they had built over 3 years crumbled in silence, leaving only the warmth of a truth they both knew there was no going back. In the morning, Mediterranean sunlight slipped through the curtains, waking Kathleen. She lay still, listening to the waves in the distance, and noticed the space beside her was already cool. Roger was up his desk, neatly arranged with an open folder. He stood by the window phone to his ear, his voice back to the steady, decisive cadence of a CEO steering a deal. Kathleen sat up, wrapping a robe around herself. His eyes met hers for a fleeting moment before turning away, continuing his conversation about Clause 7 and return on investment. A strange air hung between them, like the night before had been a passing dream. Kathleen told herself to wrap the memory tight, because she knew one thing with Roger: some moments could never cross from the side of emotion into the side of business without changing shape entirely. She slipped quietly into the bathroom, letting the sound of Barcelona's waves merge with the rush of water, and thought about the critical meeting awaiting them in a few hours. Outside, the city still blazed with life. Inside, an invisible thread had forever changed how they looked at each other. Late October in Atlanta brought a thin layer of mist, as if the air wanted to slow life down. In her small 7th-floor midtown apartment, Kathleen sat motionless on the edge of the bed, both hands gripping something tiny yet unbearably heavy, a pregnancy test, its 2 pink lines stark and undeniable. She'd assumed her fatigue was just the result of work pressure and constant business travel. But over the past week, her body had been different. The morning coffee she'd never missed now turned her stomach. Strange. Aches had settled into her back, and a relentless tiredness kept her seated longer at her desk. Finally, on a rainy afternoon, she entered the corner pharmacy. And now, the result lay before her eyes. The cold of the wooden floor seeped into her bare feet, but couldn't cool the rising chaos in her chest. She drew a deep breath, but it shuddered on the way out. Barcelona flashed in her mind, the golden lights along the shore, the glass of red wine, Roger's low voice saying something before their lips found each other. One night, it had been enough to alter the course of her life. Kathleen rose and stepped toward the bathroom mirror. Harsh white light illuminated her face, drawing attention to the faint shadows under her eyes. Her deep brown gaze met her own strange and steady simultaneously. She didn't need anyone to tell her this was a pivot point. Her mother Loretta had raised her alone, setting aside her dream of opening a nursing clinic to provide for her child. Kathleen had grown up among unpaid bills and the sound of her mother humming jazz to push away exhaustion. As a girl, she'd sworn never to repeat her mother's life. No dependence, no child left with the ache of abandonment. Her phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit with a message from the legal department. Roger needs the Barcelona contract risk report in 30 minutes. She picked it up, fingers hovering over the keyboard. No, not yet. The next morning, the 48th floor of Skyline Robotics was as bustling as ever. Sunlight streamed through glass, reflecting off piles of files and glowing screens. Kathleen walked in wearing a cream suit. Her stride as composed as always, only her grip on the tablet tighter than usual. Roger was bent over his desk, reviewing a draft contract. He looked up when she entered. "Where's the Alvarez contract report?" "On your desk," she replied, setting down the folder. Her voice was so steady that she surprised herself. He flipped through a few pages, then nodded. "You even accounted for the possibility they'll request an extended warranty clause." "Good." She gave a small, restrained smile, then returned to her desk. Every word he spoke, every glance in her direction tempted her to pause, but she forced herself to keep her rhythm unchanged. That night, her apartment was awash in warm amber light. She sat at the dining table with a thick notebook she'd kept since college. On its pages, neat handwriting laid out her plans to open a management consulting firm specializing in helping small and medium-sized businesses streamline operations, cut costs, and grow sustainably. She'd thought she'd begin at 35 once she'd saved enough and gathered sufficient experience. It would have to happen sooner, not for ambition's sake, but for the tiny life growing inside her daily. Kathleen began drafting a budget, her current savings, 6 months emergency cushion, medical costs, and expenses for the baby's first year. The numbers staring back at her were both sobering and real. She would have to leave Skyline before her belly grew too noticeable. She'd have to find a new apartment, perhaps in Decatur, where quiet neighborhoods still existed and rents were manageable. She would have to manage independently, because she couldn't count on Roger Anderson, a man who had built a fortress of cold precision around himself for years. In the weeks that followed, Kathleen became a master at concealment. She chose loose-cut outfits and traded heels for discreet low pumps. When nausea struck, she'd excuse herself from meetings, suck on a ginger candy in the break room, then return with her professional smile intact. One afternoon, Maya, the young data analyst, stopped by her desk, tilting her head. "You seem different lately. Just busy?" Kathleen smiled faintly, sidestepping the girl's gaze. Busy as always. But in the bathroom mirror, she could see herself changing each day. Not just in body, but in her eyes, deeper, more resolute, as if guarding an unspoken treasure. One late afternoon, Loretta called. Her mother's voice came through the line, warm but sharp. "Daughter, your voice sounds different. Is something going on?" Kathleen looked out the window, and the sunset-tinted glass towers were pink. "Just a little tired, Mom." Loretta paused. "I've raised you long enough to know when you're keeping something from me. But fine. Tell me when you're ready. I'll still be here." The words blurred Kathleen's vision. Even without admitting it, she knew Loretta would figure it out soon enough. But before telling her, Kathleen wanted to be sure she was ready for every possible choice. That night, lying in the dark, she listened to distant traffic and matched her heartbeat to the smaller one she hadn't heard but already felt. Roger's image flickered his eyes in that Barcelona night, the steady hand pouring wine, the silence the next morning. She wondered if he knew. Would it change anything? Or would he handle it like a business problem, efficiently, decisively keeping emotion out of it? Kathleen wasn't ready to test that answer. Not now. One morning in the pale light of early winter, she stepped into the office and saw Roger speaking with a group of project leads. His gaze skimmed over her, lingering just a beat, as if to say something. But then he turned back, continuing his talk about delivery deadlines and progress reports. Kathleen walked straight to her desk, opened her tablet, and continued as if the world hadn't shifted. But deep down, she knew a new world had already taken shape, silent, secret, yet alive and demanding, growing inside her. Winter mornings in Atlanta were crisp and dry, the pale sunlight washing the glass high-rises in a cold silver sheen. Kathleen stepped out of the subway station, her hand gripping the strap of her bag, the scarf around her neck shielding her wind-chapped skin. Inside, Skyline Robotics. The 48th floor remained its separate world, bright with artificial light and alive with the steady rhythm of keyboards clicking. Kathleen greeted a few colleagues, set her bag down, and powered up her tablet. Her day's to-do list is lined up in a neat column: review the Seattle contract, prepare a report for the tech department, and adjust Roger's schedule to avoid overlapping with the shareholders' meeting. The motions were so familiar, she could do them almost without looking. But today, Kathleen's mind was elsewhere. Beneath the stack of work files, a private spreadsheet lay: open rental prices in Decatur, preschool tuition estimates in the area, projected pre- and postnatal medical costs. She'd spent many nights calculating, crossing out, recalculating. Every figure pointed toward a single deadline: leaving Skyline before her pregnancy could no longer be hidden. On her lunch break, Kathleen left the building and found a small cafe on the corner. The air inside was warm with the smell of freshly roasted coffee and toasted waffles. She chose a window seat, opened her laptop, and began drafting the outline for Harbor Strategies, the consulting firm she'd been dreaming of since college. Bullet points began to take shape. Target clients: small and mid-sized businesses in the Atlanta area. Services process optimization, reduction of operational costs, expansion strategies. 6-month goal: secure 3 steady clients to maintain stable revenue. She pictured a small office flooded with natural light walls, lined with planning boards and strategy maps. A place where she would control her own time, dropping her child off at school in the morning, coming home in time for dinner. A new notification lit up her phone, snapping her out of the vision. A message from Maya, the young analyst. "Heard you're leaving Skyline. Is it true?" Kathleen blinked, her heartbeat skipping. She hadn't told anyone except her mother. So where had the rumor begun? That afternoon, in a small meeting room, Kathleen was reviewing the Seattle report with the tech team when 2 colleagues at the far end exchanged glances and whispered in half-hidden tones. She caught fragments: Barcelona, Roger leaving. She kept her tone steady while presenting, but her hands on the table tightened slightly. Kathleen had been at Skyline long enough to know that rumors could spread faster than any email. And once a story wrapped Roger Anderson's name into it, every gaze would eventually turn toward the other person in the narrative, her. When the meeting ended, Maya approached. "You okay?" The younger woman's eyes held a flicker of concern. "It's just, they're saying things that aren't true. I thought you should know." Kathleen gave a slight nod, smiling in reassurance. "I know how to let them die down." But inside she understood these whispers pushed her departure date closer. That night, her midtown apartment glowed under the warm light of her desk lamp. Kathleen sat before her notebook, listing the tasks ahead. 1. Finalize the financial plan. 2. View houses in Decatur. Prioritize areas with good schools. 3. Find Harbor Strategies' first potential client. 4. Draft resignation letter. Her pen paused at number 4. Just one sheet of paper, a few lines of text, but it would cut off 3 years of connection, late-night contract edits, side-by-side business trips, glances whose meaning she could never quite pin down. Leaning back in her chair, Kathleen closed her eyes. Roger's image came unbidden sharp in every detail, the gaze that seemed to skim over everyone else, but linger longer on her, the deep voice speaking her name in late meetings. She knew she couldn't let those memories hold her here. The next morning in the elevator to the 48th floor, Kathleen overheard 2 project staff talking. You hear Kathleen is quitting something to do with Barcelona and the boss. Seriously, I thought she was way too professional for that. She kept her eyes forward as though she hadn't heard a word, but she could feel the weight of eyes following her when she stepped out. On her desk, an email from Roger waited. See me at 3 p.m. Need to discuss Seattle plan. Short, emotionless. The meeting lasted exactly 20 minutes and focused entirely on contract clauses. Roger never mentioned the rumors, nor did he ask about the changes in her that he must have noticed. The way he kept his distance left Kathleen both relieved and faintly aching. Later that afternoon, sunlight slanted across the glass panels as Kathleen reopened her spreadsheet. Her savings were nearly at target, helped along by the bonus from the Barcelona deal. She booked a weekend appointment with a realtor in Decatur. Her phone rang. It was her mother. When are you going to tell Roger? Loretta asked directly without preamble. Kathleen was silent for a few seconds. I'm not ready, Mom. And I don't want this to be decided like a business transaction. Loretta sighed. You're the baby's mother. You have the right to choose. But remember, hiding the truth is its burden. After the call, Kathleen sat by the window for a long time. The city lights came on, reflected in her eyes, like 1,000 unanswered questions. She opened her laptop late that night and returned to Harbor Strategies' outline. The first line on the page glowed faintly in the dim light. Goal to create value and freedom for myself. So my child grows up, knowing I chose them, and I chose myself. She kept typing each word deliberate, as if staking a marker she would not retreat from. The evening rain came down on Atlanta without warning, as if trying to wash away every sound in the city. Kathleen was gathering a stack of papers on her desk when her phone vibrated. On the screen, her mother's name appeared, Loretta. Her voice was raspier and weaker than usual when it came through the speaker. Can you come to Emory Hospital right now? I have a fever. The doctor said they want to keep me under observation. Kathleen's heartbeat seemed to drop a beat. She grabbed her coat, leaving her laptop and files behind. Outside condensation clung to the car windows, the streetlights smearing into blurred golden streaks. She drove quickly through familiar streets, her chest tightening with worry and a faint, unnameable fear. Emory Hospital glowed in sterile white light. The long carpeted hallway magnified every footstep. Kathleen hurried into room 304, where Loretta lay in bed, her hair slightly damp from the earlier rain, her face more gaunt than usual. Beside her, the heart monitor beeped steadily, a reassuring sound, and a reminder that safety was not yet assured. Mom, Kathleen murmured, moving to take her hand. Her mother's skin was cooler than expected, but the grip still carried a trace of warmth. Loretta opened her eyes, a faint curve at her lips. You came after work, Kathleen replied. That I dropped everything at the office and came straight here, pulling a chair close. What did the doctor say? Just mild pneumonia, but they want me here a few days for IV meds. I told them I didn't need it, but that young doctor insisted, Loretta said with a smile, though her breathing was still strained. Kathleen held her hand tighter, the brief relief already replaced by another wave of unease. Since learning she was pregnant, she'd thought she'd have time to prepare, but seeing her mother here, she realized any plan could be overturned in a single breath. Silence stretched over a few heartbeats. Loretta studied her daughter, a mother's eyes quick to catch even the most minor changes. Kathleen, you look different lately. In your eyes and the way you dress. You're hiding something from me, aren't you? Kathleen turned her gaze to the window, where raindrops clung stubbornly to the glass. It's nothing, Mom. Just a lot of work. Don't tell me that, Loretta cut in, her voice firm but warm. I've raised you for nearly 30 years. I plan to leave Skyline, start my consulting firm, and raise the baby independently. It'll be safe. Safe isn't always best, Loretta said slowly. You're strong, but being a single mother is a long, hard road. If Roger truly cares, he deserves to know. And you deserve support, even if the outcome isn't what you hoped for. Kathleen stayed quiet, staring down at her interlaced fingers. She thought of late nights in the office when Roger approached, gently setting a folder on her desk without many words. She remembered his eyes softening briefly in Barcelona, only to close off again the next morning, like a door shutting tight. Loretta clasped her daughter's hands more firmly. Whatever you decide, I'm here. But don't let the fear of the past steer the course of your future. A long silence followed, broken only by the rain outside and the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Kathleen inhaled deeply, as if trying to etch every word into memory. When Loretta finally drifted to sleep, Kathleen sat alone in the room. Light from the hallway spilled through the crack under the door, falling across the bare white wall. She unlocked her phone, the first name in her contacts, Roger Anderson. Her finger hovered just above the call button, then stopped. She switched off the screen and set the phone on the table. Not tonight. Leaving the hospital, she stepped into the street, the damp cold of the rain seeping into her hair. The city was still lit, but for her, everything felt slower. Loretta's words echoed, "Don't let fear lead your future." She opened Harbor Strategies' planning notebook in her apartment and turned to a fresh page. The first line she wrote, "Consider the impact of the truth." Below it, she drew 2 columns. Tell Roger, possible support, shared responsibility. Risk of losing control over the plan. Danger of the relationship being made public. Keep it secret. Full autonomy. Financial and emotional strain alone. Risk he learns from someone else. The words formed neatly on the page, but her heart leaned toward neither side. Outside, the rain had stopped. In the sky, a few dim stars blinked through the clouds. Kathleen closed the notebook, resting her hand over her belly, feeling the new heartbeat growing inside her, a heartbeat that knew nothing of calculations, only love and presence. She whispered more to herself than anyone else. I will choose you first. Always. On the first morning of the week, winter sunlight filtered through the transparent glass walls of the 48th floor, breaking into cold, pale patches across the marble floor. Skyline Robotics kept its steady rhythm, the hum of printers, the clatter of keyboards, the brisk steps of shoes down the hallway. Kathleen sat upright at her desk, but beneath her hands was not a contract or a meeting schedule. It was a resignation letter, typed, printed, and folded neatly inside a white envelope. She had spent the entire night writing, deleting, then writing again, finally settling on a brief, polite tone. For personal and family reasons, I wish to end my employment at Skyline Robotics 2 weeks from today. My sincere thanks for the opportunities and trust I have received here. Kathleen knew that a chapter of her life would close when this envelope landed on Roger's desk. And though her heart still carried flashes of Barcelona, she forced herself to remember the reason for leaving the safety of her plan and the child growing inside her day by day. At precisely 9 a.m., Roger stepped out of an internal meeting. His navy suit fit perfectly, his tie knotted tight, his eyes sweeping the room before they stopped on Kathleen waiting for him. "I have something I need to discuss with you," she said, her voice even and slightly subdued. He nodded and gestured toward his office. The door closed, shutting out all sound from the outside. Kathleen placed the envelope on his desk. "This is my resignation letter." Roger paused, his sharp blue eyes locking on her, as if to read every hidden thought. He took the envelope, opened it, and read. No muscle moved in his face, but his fingers tightened slightly on the paper's edge. "Family reasons." His voice was low, threaded with an unnameable tension. "Your mother," Kathleen nodded. "She needs me to be around more. I can't keep up with Skyline's schedule anymore." Roger leaned back in his chair, silent for a few seconds. "We can adjust, work remotely, reduce meetings. I'll even let you choose exactly which projects you want to be on. Kathleen, you know you can't be replaced." She drew a steady breath, keeping her gaze firm. "I appreciate that, but my decision is made." His eyes darkened slightly. "Is there something else? Something you're not telling me?" The question pierced her composure like a needle through fabric. Kathleen looked away, her eyes landing on the stack of documents on his desk. "Nothing else. I need time for my family." Roger straightened, setting the letter down, his fingers tapping lightly against its edge. "I don't believe you," he said slowly. "You've never quit anything halfway, and you wouldn't walk away just because you need rest." Kathleen felt her pulse quicken, but her voice stayed measured. "Some decisions don't need explanations." He stayed silent for another beat, then gave a slight nod, as if accepting her answer for now, or merely stepping back to watch further. "You'll serve the whole 2 weeks?" "Yes." When she stood, his hand instinctively held down the envelope as if to keep something from slipping away. But in the end, he let go. That afternoon, word that Kathleen was leaving Skyline spread quickly across the 48th floor. More glances followed her, more hushed conversations cut off when she walked by. Maya came to her desk, her voice almost a whisper. "I don't want to believe it." "You're leaving?" Kathleen gave a faint smile. "Everything changes, Maya. You'll do just fine." Maya's eyes stayed curious, as though she wanted to ask more, but in the end she nodded and walked away. Late in the evening, the office was nearly empty. Kathleen stayed behind to finish the Seattle report work she wanted completed before her departure. Beyond the glass, the city lights stretched to the horizon like an endless carpet of gold. Holding a coffee cup, Roger emerged from the conference room without his tie. He stopped at her desk. "You still have a lot to hand over. If you need, I'll assign Maya to help." "That's not necessary," Kathleen said, eyes on her screen. "I'll finish everything." He lingered a moment, then spoke, his tone quieter. "Kathleen, you've lost weight, and you're different." She looked up, meeting his eyes that were not simply assessing her work, but probing for a crack to step through. "Just juggling work and home," she said lightly. He studied her a moment longer, then nodded briefly and walked away. But Kathleen knew his suspicion had not eased when his silhouette disappeared behind the glass. At home, she opened Harbor Strategies' planning notebook. The latest page detailed meetings with potential clients, a list of essentials for the small office, and a summer launch date. Every word was a step away from Skyline and from Roger's reach. But the morning still lingered in her mind, those blue eyes that seemed to pierce through her, the restrained voice unable to entirely hide the current beneath. He was used to having all the information in his hands. This time, he didn't. Kathleen placed a hand over her belly and closed her eyes. Silence might be the only way to keep everything within her control for now, until she was ready to face him. A week later, during a leadership meeting, Roger's gaze occasionally drifted toward Kathleen as she presented the project update. It wasn't the usual evaluative look. It carried a layer of contemplation mixed with resolve. When the meeting ended, he stopped her at the door. "Tomorrow, meet me in my office at 8 before work starts." Kathleen blinked. "Is something urgent?" "Just come. I'll explain when you're there." He left without another word, leaving her standing in the quiet hallway. And in Kathleen's chest, something vague stirred, not quite fear, but the sense that the shield protecting her secret was about to be tested. The next morning, the city was still wrapped in a thin veil of mist when Kathleen left her midtown apartment. The streets to Skyline were quieter than usual. Cafes still shuttered, streetlights casting a faint glitter onto the damp sidewalks. She arrived 10 minutes early, the elevator carrying her to the nearly empty 48th floor. The soft blue glow of the overnight lights reflected off the marble, giving the space an oddly hushed stillness. Roger's office door was ajar. "Come in," his voice called when she knocked lightly. Roger sat behind his desk. Tie undone white shirt sleeves rolled up 2 steaming cups of coffee on the table. He gestured for her to sit across from him. "I'm guessing you haven't had breakfast," he said, sliding 1 cup toward her. "Don't worry, it's not the office coffee. I ordered it from the place you like on Peachtree Street." Kathleen paused. He remembered, but she only gave a slight nod, setting the cup down without drinking. "Why did you ask me here so early?" Roger didn't answer right away. He took out a folder from a drawer and placed it in front of her. "I've reviewed your schedule and work over the past 3 months. Some things don't add up." Kathleen kept her expression calm, but her hands clenched slightly in her lap. "Don't add up how you've turned down at least 3 major business trips citing family matters. You've been leaving earlier than usual many afternoons. And lately, you've been avoiding direct meetings with me." His blue eyes were sharp as glass under the lights. "Kathleen, I know something's going on." She chose silence instead of denial or explanation. Roger leaned forward. "I've given you chances to tell me, but you won't. So I'll ask directly, does this have anything to do with Barcelona?" Kathleen's heart thudded hard. The night returned to her in an instant. Golden lights along the coast, wine pouring into glasses, that spontaneous yet weighted kiss. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "Barcelona is in the past, but its consequences aren't," Roger said slowly, as if testing each word. The air between them stretched taut, thin as glass about to shatter. Kathleen rose, keeping her voice steady. "I don't know what you're implying, but I don't want to have this conversation." She turned toward the door, but his voice came from behind, quiet, yet enough to make her stop. "I went to Midtown last week." Kathleen froze. "What did you say?" "Your apartment. I wanted to return a file you left after the meeting, but standing in the hallway, I saw a box of prenatal vitamins on your kitchen counter through the door." She spun around, eyes flashing with caution. "You followed me." "No," he said softly but firmly. "I care." Kathleen swallowed down the pressure rising in her chest. "You have no right." Roger stood, coming around the desk to face her. "If the child is mine, I do have a right." The words cut deep. Kathleen felt her breath hitch. "You don't know anything." "Then tell me," Roger replied, eyes fixed on her. "Please don't make me find the answer on my own." Kathleen left his office right after striding quickly down the long hallway. Outside, the morning mist still lingered, but a storm was rising inside her. He suspected, almost knew. The question was, would she let him cross that line? The entire day, Kathleen buried herself in work, avoiding unnecessary interactions. Roger was different. He appeared in several of her meetings, his gaze quietly tracking her every reaction. In the afternoon, as she prepared to leave, Maya approached. "I saw the boss looking at you a lot today." "Something going on?" Kathleen offered a faint smile. "Nothing, Maya. Don't worry." But even as she said it, she knew things had already slipped beyond her original control. That night in her apartment, Kathleen stood before the mirror, her hand unconsciously resting on her belly. She had passed the 3-month mark. Her body was beginning to show. She could hide it for a few more weeks with loose clothing, but the time would come when she couldn't. The doorbell rang, breaking her thoughts. She opened it. Roger stood there, wearing a dark gray coat, his breath a thin cloud in the cold air. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Kathleen stayed in the doorway. "I didn't invite you. You don't have to." He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the neat but warm apartment. His gaze stopped at the kitchen counter where the same box of prenatal vitamins sat in plain view. "So I wasn't mistaken," he said quietly, not as a question. Kathleen took a deep breath, but kept her tone even. "Roger, this is my life. You don't get to decide it." He stepped closer now, just an arm's length away. "If that's my child, I can't stand on the sidelines. I've lost too much in my life to silence. This time I won't." She shook her head. "You'll turn everything into a contract, a clause. I don't want my child growing up with a binding term on paper." Roger said nothing, but his eyes wavered momentarily, as if she'd touched an old wound. "Not tonight," Kathleen said, opening the door. "You should go." He stood still for a few seconds, then gave a slight nod and stepped into the hallway. But before the door closed, he looked at her again, a look that was both a challenge and a promise that this conversation wasn't over. When his footsteps faded, Kathleen leaned against the door, eyes closed. She knew she'd bought herself more time, but she had also pushed him closer to the truth. And once that truth emerged, every plan she had built would have to change. That night after Roger left the apartment, Kathleen stood by the window for a long time, watching the streetlights shimmer on the wet pavement. Somewhere below, the city still hummed with noise, but from this high floor, it all faded into a blur of scattered light. Her hand drifted instinctively to her belly. When Roger stepped inside and spotted the prenatal milk powder, she knew a piece of her secret had slipped beyond her control. But what unsettled her even more was his gaze, not just suspicion, but an unmistakable undercurrent of fear. Kathleen had seen that look in others during life-and-death moments in the family, but in Roger, it was unfamiliar, at odds with the calm composure he always wore. A few blocks away, Roger sat in his car by the curb, engine off, not ready to drive away. Droplets of leftover rain trailed slowly down the windshield, dragging the city's lights into streaks. The image of that milk powder box kept circling back in his mind. He remembered a morning 3 years ago when his ex-wife, Marissa, lost their baby at 6 months. That moment had carved an invisible scar into him, Marissa's hollow stare, the abrupt silence of the fetal heart monitor. Since then, Roger had never let himself imagine having a child again, not because he didn't want one, but because he feared the crushing loss might happen again. But if the baby Kathleen carried were truly his, it would change everything. He couldn't stand aside and let the child grow up never knowing his father. He glanced toward the building where Kathleen lived. The apartment on the 6th floor was still lit. He knew he would have to find a way to make her speak, not to control her, but to be there from the start. The next day, Kathleen arrived at the office later than usual. She'd poorly slept, her mind heavy. But as she stepped onto the 48th floor, she was startled to see Roger standing with Maya, speaking near her desk. Maya's expression turned briefly awkward when she noticed her. "Good morning, Kathleen," the younger woman said before hurrying off. Roger didn't greet her. He handed her a file, the Boston contract. Please review it before we send it. Kathleen replied that Boston isn't one of my projects, switching on her computer. It is now, he said, shortly before walking into his office. Kathleen noticed Roger finding every excuse to draw her into meetings and new reports all morning, as though keeping her within sight. Whenever she tried to create space, he appeared with a plausible reason to be nearby. By lunchtime, she excused herself to eat out, but when she turned into a small cafe on the corner, she found Roger already sitting at a table in the back. The coffee before him was untouched. It was clear he'd been waiting. We need to talk. He began, his tone calm, but his eyes anything but. We've already talked, Kathleen replied, slipping off her coat. And I have nothing more to add. Roger leaned back. Kathleen, I won't apologize for caring. If I'm wrong, I'll step back. But I won't let you shut me out if I'm right. She met his gaze, her voice steady. Roger, I know you're used to people telling you everything. But my personal life isn't a business report. He tilted his head slightly, weighing each word. True, but I've learned something: leave the distance too long, and there are people and opportunities. You lose forever. That afternoon, when Kathleen returned to the office, Maya pulled her aside. I don't know what's happening between you and the boss, but today he's different, focused but restless, like he's afraid of missing something. Kathleen only smiled faintly and said nothing. But the comment stayed with her the rest of the day. That night, Loretta called from the hospital, her voice stronger. Have you thought more about telling Roger, Mom? Kathleen leaned her head back against the chair. He's almost guessed. But I'm afraid it'll all become a negotiation once he knows. Or are you afraid for yourself? Loretta asked, gentle but sharp, fearful that if you let him in, you won't be able to keep your distance. Kathleen stayed silent. Her mother had always seen too much. Across the city, Roger sat in his sprawling but empty apartment. He pulled up the Barcelona photos on his computer, the moments from the business trip that had changed everything. In one shot, Kathleen stood at the hotel balcony, the sea breeze lifting her hair and a faint smile on her lips. He remembered clearly that on that night, they were no longer boss and assistant. And now, if the child was the result of that night, he closed the laptop, leaned back, and shut his eyes. For the first time in years, Roger feared losing something he hadn't yet honestly held. Late at night, Kathleen sat at her home desk, the resignation letter still unsent before her. Outside the window, street lamps stretched long streaks of light across the wet pavement. She knew the longer she delayed, the more complicated it would become. But between the fear of losing her freedom and the fear of hurting the child by cutting its father out, Kathleen was starting to realize she couldn't weigh the scales on only one side. Her hand rested lightly on her belly. Maybe soon she would have to choose: either let him in or close the door for good. On Friday night, rain poured down on Atlanta once again. Heavy drops pounded against the window, creating a monotonous but relentless rhythm. Kathleen curled up on the sofa, one hand cradling a warm cup of ginger tea, the other resting lightly on her belly. She had planned to spend the evening reviewing the contracts she needed to hand over. But a sudden sharp ache twisted through her lower abdomen, making her stop. At first, she thought it was just a muscle strain. But minutes later, the pain returned deeper, more pronounced. Her hand trembled. The doctor warned her to be extremely cautious during the first months to avoid pressure and stress. The past week had been stressful, and now her body was starting to react. Kathleen stood, intending to drive herself to the hospital. But when the third wave of pain hit, she realized she didn't have the strength. In that moment, the only name that came to mind was Roger. She picked up her phone, hesitated for a few heartbeats, then dialed. Roger was in his home office, surrounded by blueprints of a new robotic prototype. When her name flashed on the screen, he answered immediately. What is it? His voice was low but urgent. "Roger." Kathleen tried to keep her tone steady, but the breaks in her breathing betrayed her. "I need to get to the hospital. But your address." He cut in. "Midtown Lenox Building, Unit 6B. Stay put. I'll be there in 5 minutes." She started to protest, but he had already hung up. True to his word, there was a knock at her door within minutes. Roger stepped in, rain clinging to his coat, his eyes flashing with concern when he saw her bent slightly a hand on her stomach. He said, "Let's go," shortly, draping a raincoat over her shoulders. On the way to the hospital, rain lashed against the windshield, but Roger kept the speed steady, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. In the car, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wipers sweeping in a measured rhythm. Kathleen glanced at him in the rearview mirror. His features looked sharper under the streetlights, but his hands on the wheel were clenched tight, betraying his tension. Emory Hospital glowed like an island in the sea of night. Roger guided Kathleen into the emergency ward, his voice firm as he spoke to the nurse, insisting on seeing an obstetrician immediately. After the examination, the doctor concluded it was just mild contractions from stress and lack of rest, not dangerous, but worth monitoring. Kathleen exhaled in relief, but Roger's eyes didn't soften. "She needs complete rest for at least 3 days, the doctor instructed. No work, no stress." Roger nodded his thanks, then turned to Kathleen. "I'm taking you home." "That's not necessary," she said, her voice weak. "I can manage." He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Kathleen, I'm not asking. Tonight I'm making sure you're safe." Back at her apartment, Roger helped her onto the sofa and set a cup of warm water in front of her. He didn't speak. He just sat across from her eyes, fixed on her as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away. "You don't have to do this," Kathleen murmured. "I'm fine now." Roger leaned back, exhaling deeply. "Kathleen, I can't pretend I don't know anymore. Tonight when I heard your voice, I realized I'd never forgive myself if something happened and I wasn't there." She stayed silent, words caught in her throat. "That's my child, isn't it?" He asked, his tone low and measured, not sharp as before, but carrying a quiet plea. Kathleen looked down at the cup of water, then raised her eyes to meet his, a gaze no longer interrogating, but wounded, waiting to be healed. She didn't answer right away. Instead, her hand rested gently over her belly, stroking. The gesture was enough for Roger to understand. He drew in a deep breath, leaning back with his eyes closed, as if absorbing a blow, one he had been bracing for. When he opened them again, his expression had shifted, less suspicion, more resolve. He said, "I would be here whether you wanted me to." Kathleen pressed her lips together. "Roger, I need control over my own life. I don't want this baby to become one of your projects." "Not a project," he cut in his voice. "Steady, a family." The two words landed between them, changing the air in the room. Kathleen turned away to avoid his gaze, but her heart was already beating to a different rhythm, the rhythm of a possibility she'd never allowed herself to imagine. When Roger left, the rain had eased. Kathleen stood by the window watching his car disappear into the mist. She knew the distance between them from this night on would never be the same. He had stepped in, and this time she wasn't sure she had the strength to close the door. 3 days after that rainy night, Kathleen was still at home resting, just as the doctor had instructed. The apartment was quiet. The only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the soft golden light spilling across the wooden floor. She thought often about Roger's words, "Not a project, a family." That sentence had taken root inside her, quietly sprouting in the stillness. On Wednesday morning, as she was making tea, Kathleen heard a knock at the door. She didn't need to look through the peephole to know who was outside. Roger stood there holding a basket of white tulips and a small paper bag. "The doctor said you should take more vitamins. he said, setting the bag on her kitchen counter. She replied that you didn't have to do that, though. Her tone lacked the sharp edge it once held. He sat down, hands clasped, his gaze following her every movement. I want to make sure you and the baby are healthy. I'm not asking permission. I'm just… Here. Kathleen stayed quiet, pouring tea into 2 cups. The warm aroma filled the space, softening the distance between them. The conversation began with small surface-level topics: the weather, Skyline's project progress, and Loretta's recovery. But inevitably, it circled back to the heart of things. After that night in Barcelona, Roger began slowly. I thought I'd never have the chance to fix the mistakes I'd made before. Marissa was pregnant, and I lost the baby before I ever got to be a father. I was so afraid it would happen again that I entirely shut the door on the future. But now… He paused, looking directly at Kathleen. Now I know I can't keep running. Kathleen set her cup down, a wave of empathy rising in her chest. She had never considered the depth of that wound in him, one deep enough to shape every decision he'd made. Roger, she said softly, I've lost a lot too, and I've learned that sometimes protecting yourself with distance is the only way to survive. But… Her hand moved to her belly. Maybe this baby needs more than that. He reached out, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel his warmth. Then, give me the chance. Not to control, but to walk through it with you. The next day, Kathleen appeared at Skyline for the last time to hand over her work. Roger personally accompanied her to each department, introducing Maya as her replacement. Colleagues looked on with mild surprise at how the tension between them had eased the edge of previous days, replaced by something quieter. When the handover was complete, Roger handed her a small envelope. He said, "This isn't a contract." A faint smile on his lips. "It's plane tickets." She opened it. 2 tickets to Charleston, South Carolina, departing that weekend. Why? Because I want us to start somewhere without glass walls and pressure, he said. Somewhere I can be with you without being the boss. Kathleen hesitated. But when she looked into his eyes, she realized the invitation wasn't just a trip. A new way promised to live a life where she and the baby wouldn't be alone. Charleston greeted them with warm sunlight and the faint scent of salt water. They walked along the harbor waves, lapping gently against the boats. Roger spoke about his childhood in a small coastal town in Maine, the first time he understood loss, and the things he wished he could have done differently. Kathleen listened, and the weight in her chest felt lighter for the first time in months. One morning they sat on the hotel balcony, watching the sunrise blush pink over the ocean. Roger placed his hand over hers, eyes fixed on the horizon. He said, "I can't promise it'll always be easy, but I promise I won't walk away. Not from you, and not from our child." Kathleen held his gaze for a long moment, then slightly nodded. In that moment she knew she had let him in no longer. Just her boss, the man from one night, but part of the story ahead. It was still the same familiar city when they returned to Atlanta, but everything felt different. Kathleen's apartment now held a wooden chair. Roger had assembled a basket of baby things in the corner, and a photo frame on the table, the picture they'd taken in Charleston, both of them smiling without the walls they once held up. Their story didn't end there. It was only the beginning, with many challenges ahead. But they would face them together, and that was what mattered most. And if you've stayed with this story until the very end, leave a comment about the moment that touched you. Most hit like and follow the channel to join in the stories to come. Because who knows, the love and courage you've just witnessed might find a way into your own life.